Brothers and sisters of the Republic, friends of liberty across the entire world, I am overjoyed to be in your presence and in the presence of my good friend, Lars Doucet. Lars Doucet is an American-Norwegian software developer, entrepreneur, and author. And I'm sure he needs no introduction for like 99% of you. But I thought I would give him one, the dignity and the honor that he deserves. He made his name in indie game development, co-founding Level Up Labs, and creating the award-winning game Defender's Quest. His background in tech and system design later fueled his work in economics and public policy. In the late 2010s, Lars shifted focus to the ideas of Henry George, and he wrote extensively about these ideas on his blog, The Game of Rent site, building a strong voice in the economic reform space. In 2022, he collected these ideas into the book Land is a Big Deal, a book which I actually own and which I should have actually had with me, but I forgot. A book explaining why rent is too high, wages are too low, and what we can do about it. The book received immense praise from big names like Vitalik Buterin and Noah Smith. Beyond writing, Lars served as the director for outreach for Common Ground USA, promoting land tax reform across the country. He's a frequent guest on podcasts and public forums, speaking about Georgism, housing policy, and economic justice generally. In 2022, Lars co-founded ValueBase, a property valuation startup using a land-first approach to improve property tax assessments. ValueBase caught major attention, including a $1.6 million in seed funding led by OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. After building out ValueBase's tools, Lars has shifted gears once again, that goddamn productive man he is, and in 2025, he co-founded the Center for Land Economics, and today he serves as president of research and development, pushing forward fair and innovative property tax reforms. So without further ado, I would like to just get right into the interview and start talking to Lars. Let's just fucking get into it. Let's have some fun. Let's see if I can do it right. Maybe. I'm inverted. Okay. Hey, Lars.
Honey, what's up?
How you doing? I don't know. Do you want to just get right into it, or I've already done like the full introduction and like hyped you up.
Yeah, sure. Let's just go right into it.
Yeah, sure. So I did have a couple of questions prepared, and I was kind of curious about your answers on them. Sure. One of my first questions had to do with the current political environment. So, given Donald Trump's re-election in 2024, which was obviously kind of a shock to America and the world at large, and the extraordinary political conditions that has created since, I was curious how that might impact Georgist organizing going forward in your view, and what do you think how do you think Georgists should feel about the Trump presidency, generally speaking? Because I do notice that in a lot of your works, you talk a lot less about current and immediate political problems and more about things like assessment models and severance taxes and so on. And I'm just very curious about your opinions on the current political environment.
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time thinking about the current political environment. I just haven't had time to write about it yet. But that's what we're doing at the CLE, at the Center for Land Economics. We're very focused on, okay, how do we get political traction now, basically? What can we change now? And I mean, the bottom line is just that, and this was even before Trump was elected, is just the federal, like there's no real path to traction for LVT at the federal level, even if the federal level was friendly to it. Right, because there's the whole Constitution, which blocks all direct taxes except income tax, because there's an amendment for that. And so, like, and if you just got a full-on Georgist in the White House, and even in Congress, like, short of a constitutional amendment, all you could really do is basically craft federal incentives for states to do things. And I mean, that could be huge, right? You could reformulate the SALT tax deduction in a way that basically encourages people to do universal building exemption at the state level. But basically, I mean, before Trump was elected and after, you should just assume that just the federal level is kind of cursed. Also, George was a ardent free trader. You know, he famously said that um, protect the law of protection seeks to do to ourselves in time of war what in times of peace what enemies seek to do to us in times of war. So that's kind of at odds with the current administration's, you know, super pro tariff thing. I have heard strangely like a couple of feelers from people in the Trump administration that like seem like kind of interested in LVT and things like that, but I'm not going to hold my breath. You know, so I think
Yeah.
basically right now we just kind of keep our heads down, just try and survive that and focus on the local level where I think there's a lot more traction that we're seeing. And the CLE is kind of like just laser focused on the state, municipal, and local level, where I think we'll see a lot of reform in the next few years.
That's very fair. I kind of agree with not holding my breath about the Trump administration passing any Georgist reforms. I mean, the guy in charge is a like real estate mogul and loves tariffs. He's kind of like the perfect guy to hate Georgism on like with every single fiber of his body. So, yeah, I'm definitely not expecting us to get much traction at the federal level, right? At least right now. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
The state of the country is changing so quickly, and history has moved in ways which I probably could have never predicted. I don't want to ever completely write it off, but I do agree with your assessment that like right now it's basically off the table.
And
Yeah,
the other aspect is that it's like I'm also like kind of afraid of just negative polarization. Like you just saw Democrats suddenly become massive free traders, which
right,
when they've
yeah,
been completely opposed to that just because Trump is now for protectionism.
right.
And I'm a little afraid of like a bad half-assed implementation, you know, getting negative polarized and toxic for the next 50 years.
That's
So
pretty fair. Yeah,
you know, and so it's like I know there are like a couple people in Trump's orbit are kind of pro LVT, but like really like the guys who have Trump's ear right now are just tariff, 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 tariff.
oh,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
and so I don't see it happening at the federal level. Anyway,
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I did a fucking excuse me. I do curse a lot on this show. I did a hunger strike on because of the Trump tariffs because I was so mad about them, and
yeah,
I will say it was like a little bit silly in retrospect because he keeps like turning them off and on again. And so
yeah,
like any kind of political action against it, especially any which is particularly serious, always seems kind of silly. I suppose that's probably the strategy he's going for. But what I was also curious about, and I do want to get into the CLE stuff in a little bit because I'm also very curious about that.
yeah.
But given that the political situation is so extraordinary and we're not entirely sure what will happen to political opposition, what do you think Georgists, excuse me, let me rephrase myself. How should Georgists approach the political situation in America if America goes in a direction that starts to look a little bit more like Hungary or Russia, where political opposition like ourselves starts to become de facto or even de jure criminalized?
I mean, that's like beyond the scope of Georgism, right? Like if America slides into a dictatorship and like, I mean, just like batten down the hatches, right?
Right.
Like I'm the last person you should be asking about that, you know.
No, it's
You
fair.
want to
I
talk
mean, I'm just curious.
yeah, yeah. I mean, then we'll have much bigger problems than, you know, like reforming the economy. You know, then we're just like, you know, every man for himself and try and like, you know, yeah, like right. So like, let's hope that doesn't happen. You know, and talk to someone who's much smarter about crawling back from the brink of dictatorship than I
Right.
am. You know, I hope it doesn't go there. You know, my kind of vibe is just like I think the kind of saving grace for the current political moment is that the the people with the worst intentions do not seem to be very effective at getting what they want.
True.
And
Same. Yeah, I hold that exact opinion. That's like the only saving grace I have.
yeah, and let's hope that continues. You know,
I admit, it would be kind of funny to see you turn into like a great Georgist revolutionary. You don't seem the type, but it would be kind of funny. I think that's what makes it funny. I think.
I don't know if I'm the right guy to kind of like lead a revolution. You know, my kind of
Probably
slogan
not.
is let's improve society somewhat because
Yeah.
small but relentless compound interest will swamp absolutely everything else on a long enough timeline.
I mean, that's a very fair perspective. And I mean, of course, I agree with it. I just, of course, like I talk about this a lot on the show. I'm pretty alarmed by the rapidly changing political situation as it is, especially just because it's like, wow,
Well,
if
I
we,
think that's also why it's such a great opportunity to
yeah,
focus on the local level, because it's like everyone has I don't know, right, sports metaphor, but basically like local government is where a lot of power lies, and like
mm,
nobody's got their eye on the ball, right?
mm,
Everything is so focused on this completely gridlocked federal layer that like nobody is paying attention to like state and local politics really.
mm.
And there is so much ample opportunity for reform. I will say, everyone listening to this who like cares about local political reform, Patrick McKenzie has a podcast. It's called Complex Systems. He just did an episode with let me see if I can look this up in 2 minutes and be a cool guy so that I don't even break my chain of thought. It is Complex Systems. He just did with, who did he just do? I can't find out, but he did an episode with some guy who was specializing in complex systems podcast. I'm just gonna look it up and I'm gonna give you the name because it's gonna keep bothering me until I get it.
No
Okay, it
problem.
is with Daniel Golaher, Understanding and Wielding Power in Local Government. The guy's written a lot of stuff. He has a blog. He's in New York, and he talks about that specifically. But the thesis is basically, and this, bears out my own experience, and Greg, who is my partner at CLE, is that you can influence local government and state government, even federal government, much more easily than you think. And once you understand how these systems work, a lot of it is doing people's homework for them
Mhm.
and putting it in exactly the kind of format that looks like a thing for them. Like a lot of times, a really good quote was, it's like a lot of people feel like they cannot get upstream of the information channel of the person they want to influence. But it's actually easy to get upstream of that by 1 inch. And that's the level that feeds down to the level you can't get to,
Interesting.
if that makes sense. It's
It
sometimes it's
kind,
easier to,
it kind of does.
yeah. Well, like a good example is like, just the posting to policy pipeline is real. And you can put ideas into the water. And anyway, go watch the podcast. There's a lot of practical tips. But basically, like, there are ways for you to, the kind of people who are currently in the business of influencing local government are like not necessarily any more competent than you. And
Mhm.
you can learn these things. They're not really published or legible anywhere except by like people in the know, like this guy. And if you figure that out, like you can find ways to like the number of people who are inserting themselves at that level is very, very small. The amount of time it takes, especially in the age of AI, of hey, ChatGPT, deep research, tell me how to practically influence local government. Please style it in the advice of Patrick McKenzie, aka Patio 11.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and it will give you a quick strategy. You can like give yourself a quick crash course on how to influence local government. I haven't fully internalized all those, so I can't spout them all for you now, but it exists. And that's where we're going to make progress in LVT, is local government in state and local.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say one concern I do have about targeting state and local government is that because politics has moved so much onto the internet, which has, I guess, centralized it a lot. I mean, that's the reason that so many eyes are on the federal government, right? Is that with the internet, almost everybody is paying attention to the largest levers of politics, and anything in their what would usually be your more immediate vicinity from a direct perceptual lens, because you're always on the internet, is no longer really like considered immediate to you. If that makes Did that make any sense?
No. I know
Yeah.
it's a complete inversion. We've been completely focused on the things that seem
Mhm.
so important, even though they're very remote from us.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, I look at the YIMBY movement as kind of a template, is that it's like the only way to do any relevant YIMBY action is on the state or local level, but it's becoming a national movement,
Right.
and that's what Ezra Klein's trying to do with his whole abundance thing, which is
Yes.
kind of piggybacking off of that. And so I think there's a way for us to kind of steal that playbook as Georgists and also learn from the historical failures of the Georgist movement over the past 100 years and figure out, like what are the levers that work and how do we achieve victory, and then how do we also get the victories to stick,
Right.
because the historical Georgists had a lot of victories, but a lot of that work was undone over the following century.
Yeah. You know what my hypothesis for that is? Would you like to hear it or no?
Sure.
All right, yeah, I'll shoot. My hypothesis is I'm using like a Max Weber model. I think George was a sort of charismatic leader, but he didn't create the necessary institutions to survive his death. And so a lot of the victories which were won through the immense power of charismatic leadership basically had no defender to protect them in the future. The single tax clubs were all way too decentralized. And in comparison, especially to like socialists who during the 20th century were very, very militant and very, very organized, George just kind of lost steam, frankly. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think here's the thing. If you're gonna go at, if you're gonna invoke socialism, shouldn't you analyze it from a materialist perspective? And if you're gonna do that, well, let's talk about the automobile. Let's talk about the history of America's vision as a country of a frontier nation, and let's talk about World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, and the New Deal, because those are the 6 magic ingredients I think that basically derailed Georgism.
Really? Okay. Go for it.
My short answer is that America is a frontier nation that has lost its frontier.
I agree
right?
with that. Yeah.
And that's central to the American identity, is that it's like, okay, so yeah, so it's the late 1800s. Like the whole history is, it's like, go west, young man. Why? Because there's free land. And when you have free land available for the taking, where the value of that land has not yet been priced in, that's a frontier. And when you have a frontier, you can do the whole Jeffersonian yeoman farmer thing, right? Because there's just land for the taking. So you're not locked in to this world of scarcity that you have back in feudal and aristocratic Europe. And the problem is, Americans like just have this like mentality that frontier is still there. And why would we do that, right? Well, because it was true. We kept finding ways to like keep getting more frontier, right? First, original 13 colonies, right? And then one of the chief grievances of the Declaration of Independence is that King George wouldn't let us expand westward. So Declaration of Independence, now we can get westward expansion. So that's another frontier. Fight with all the Indians, kick them off their land, so we get all that land. But then you reach the West Coast, and then you run out of room to expand, and then scarcity starts to set in, and housing prices start to rise, and that's the Gilded Age. That's when George is writing. And but then we unlock a second frontier, and that second frontier is the automobile. Arguably the railroads to a certain degree, but like what the automobile does is that it pushes that margin of production back, right? It makes it so that you can live far away in the suburbs, but still have access to the productivity of a job in the city, right? So that adds like exponentially, geometrically more land that went from worthless to valuable overnight. And George doesn't anticipate that. I mean, he anticipates that technology will increase the value of the land, but he doesn't anticipate the automobile specifically. And we just sprawled our way out of the problem that Georgism was the solution for 100 years. And there are all kinds of problems to sprawl, right? Pollution and inefficiency and all these problems. But like we were able to just like ignore our core problem and sprawl our way out of it.
Right. It sweeps it under the rug. Yeah.
Right. And that lasted for like a good century. And then throw in like, why did Georgism itself get derailed? So the automobile takes the pressure off. We go from the Gilded Age to the Roaring 20s and, eventually the post-war boom. By the way, we have 2 world wars between the Georgist movement and 1950. We also have the New Deal and the rise of communism as just like, just like completely recombobulating our ideological axes. All these things kind of conspire in it. Also, like the Georgists and the New Dealers were kind of allies at first. Then the New Deal, like the income tax amendment was supposed to enable LVT. Some historians say that the New Dealers kind of stabbed the Georgists in the back at the last moment and just kind of like kicked them aside. And then the automobile and post-war expansion, like kind of like, housing's cheap now. Who cares about Georgism anymore? And it goes to sleep for 100 years until the conditions of the Gilded Age arise again, which is now. And we've sprawled our way to the maximum extent. And we have a housing crisis, that we can't solve our way out of. And then, of course, those material conditions emerge such that the natural conclusions that George made back in 1879 become obvious again because they have reperpetuated themselves. That's the argument for why Georgism kind of went to sleep for 100 years from a materialist perspective, and also why it is reemerging as a movement now. if I had written everything I had written 15 years ago, nobody would have cared.
Right.
Right? Because it wouldn't have resonated with anyone. It's not because I'm so special, you know. It's like plenty of other people were writing the same kind of things as me, but writing them now caused them to resonate because people were like, "Oh, I know exactly what he's talking about because that's what's happening to me."
Right. Yeah, I get
You
that.
know?
Yeah, I do. I actually, I don't, I will say, I don't think our analyses are incompatible because I actually agree with that analysis as well. I mean, I think I'm very partial to the theory that socialists kind of outcompeted Georgists in the 20th century, and then
I completely agree.
yeah, I mean also I think the socialist pitch is on its face a stronger pitch, because
It's got better villains. It sounds more fun.
yeah,
You
and it's
know?
like, why not have everything? Why stop at the land, right? Like let's just take
Right.
everything, right?
And most importantly, we hadn't tried it.
Exactly.
We didn't have a century of piles of skulls and dead bodies.
Right. And so once we had those skulls and dead bodies, suddenly everybody's like, huh, I might not want to do at least that again. Maybe I'll try the Georgism thing. You know?
Right. No,
Yeah.
And the other thing is we hadn't tried we tried capitalism, but we hadn't tried 20th century capitalism.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You know, so the two like ideologies that sucked up all the oxygen and just like created this like you know, these two poles, like each of them was like, well, we need to try our thing, right? And so we have tried those in every possible configuration for the last 100 years, you know, whereas like Georgism, it's been tried a couple of times, but, you know, to a much lesser extent, because it's just been so obscured for the past 100 years. And I think that's like what's really happened.
I so wish Sun Yat-sen won. That would have been such an interesting experiment to see like an actual proper, like full Georgia state. Because I know that there's been smaller examples. I know that Singapore is like kind of Georgist light, and obviously like to a lesser degree Norway as well with their severance taxes. But man, like that was like our Lenin, and we dropped the ball. You know what I mean?
What's so interesting is this is so interesting to me is like the whole thesis of like Georgism has never been tried. You know, that's used on both sides. It's used by Georgism's critics to mock them, to be like it's never been tried because it can't be tried. And also to like mock Georgists for saying that it's like, okay, well, you're doing the same thing the communists are doing, just like no implementation's ever good enough, but one day there'll be a good enough one.
Right.
But
Yeah.
no, it won't.
And it's always a constantly moving goalpost.
Right. And then Georgists themselves like will often like say it's like, well, you just let us try it because like it's barely been tried. And my contention is that it has been tried and it has succeeded. And it's being tried right now. And the difference between Georgism and socialism is that Georgism doesn't require a revolution.
True.
Partial Georgism will give you partial results. And we have examples of partial Georgism everywhere. And the best example of it is just any American state that has no income tax and has a high property tax, right? And that is more Georgist. Like if you think of Georgism as a spectrum from like in the middle, there's zero Georgism. On the left is anti-Georgism, right?
Yeah.
Like
feudal society.
well, you're actively like subsidizing land ownership and you're actively like taxing everything else. And then maximum Georgism is LVT is your only tax, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know,
or anything like in that general area. Yeah.
And the thing is, like Georgism predicts the further you are to the right, even if you're not that far to the right, you know, forget the left, right, but like further you are towards maximum Georgism, the closer you are to G, you know, and the further away you are from negative G, you know, with zero in the middle, you know, so even if you're only at 0.2 G, we would expect all these benefits, you know,
right?
Yeah, and I would argue that Texas and many other states that have similar profiles to it are closer in the positive G axis than states like California, which I would argue are negative G to some extent.
Right. And we do empirically see those benefits in those states, right?
We do empirically see those benefits. Like the largest one is just people are moving with their feet. I think that's the best metric. People are moving out of California and they're moving to Texas. They're moving to Florida. Florida currently is talking about abolishing their property taxes. And Texas has been saying that for 2 decades. It's completely run by Republicans. The dog has caught the car. They're never going to do it. It's just this dance every year. Florida might actually do it. If they do, we'll have a very good natural experiment of what happens as Florida goes from positive G to negative G.
Right.
You know? And because it's so interesting to see Republicans argue about abolishing property taxes because they're just going to adopt blue state policies. But what's so interesting is that anywhere you have a high property tax is an imperfect land value tax. I will go on record as saying if we never get LVT, if we can just get well-administered property taxes, that's still a huge benefit from the status quo, especially if we can offset other taxes with that. And then to go the full way, take a current property tax regime, add on a universal building exemption to exempt the value of all the buildings, and then make sure those assessments are good, fair, and equitable. Then I think you could see a lot of lift. You could see it right now. You could do it with existing property tax regimes, which are in place everywhere.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
everyone always talks about this administrative burden of Georgism. Like, who's going to assess all the land? It's like same people are doing it now.
Right.
We'll just train them better.
Yeah.
We're already paying them. And we could actually reduce the costs because they're also having to do all this extra stuff. Because if you've ever seen an assessment, like the assessment criteria in the statutes of all the stuff they're supposed to do, like adjudicate homestead exemptions, which are dependent on who lives there, right? Shenandoah, are you currently married to Mrs. Shenandoah, or are you separated? Because, or are you divorced? Because if you're married, each of you only gets one homestead exemption.
Right.
Right. If you're separated and living apart, one of you gets it, and I need to figure out who gets it. If you're divorced, then you're both entitled to one. And I need to make sure you're not claiming homestead exemptions in other states. I'm not making sure you're not claiming it on your Airbnb. There's all this adjudication to like adjudicating homestead exemption bigamy. And that's just one thing. And then there's like states that's like, okay, are you a disabled veteran? That's not a property of the house. That's a property of the person who lives in the house. Which is not in my database. And all this stuff, all these overlay.
And Georgism is even simpler than all of that, or at least it very well could be.
Right. Well, the other thing is I was getting back to the evidence. Like we can get into assessments in a second, but going to the evidence, it's like, there were dozens of cities in the United States that tried Georgism, or variants of it. Houston had a close to an LVT, a split rate tax. You've had the experiments in Pittsburgh and in Pennsylvania, and you had all kinds of places through the United States in the first half of the 20th century. And so mostly just people just don't know about those examples. And if you look at them, they all seemed like they worked. I know the evidence is 100 years old, but then we can look to the modern evidence of just the predictions that are made from just standard property tax regimes. And everywhere we look, all the things people say about like property taxes do not raise the price of homes. Like they are more affordable there because that price gets capitalized into the selling price and kind of kicks speculators out. So I would say there's plenty of evidence for it. And we should be relying more on modern evidence rather than historical evidence, because I think it's
I agree. Yeah.
And but like, I mean, it's good to correct the record when people, try to get lazy broadsides across without doing the research. Anyway, I'll return the line of questioning to you.
Of course. Well, thank you. No, I really enjoyed that answer. You were very enthusiastic. I will say it's very enjoyable to talk to you because like your eyes are like fucking pools of light when you talk about Georgism. You just get like so excited and you just kind of think,
this is what happens when you talk to neurologically troubled person about their special interests. So,
that's okay. You know what? We have that in common. We could share something. I don't know if people know, but we've known each other for a couple of years now, right? Like
we've been in the DM groups and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. I don't think we've never been like super close, but I think I've known you since like 2021, so it's been like 4 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. But anyway, so getting back onto questioning, I did want to pull back a little bit and ask about the center of land economics, because I will be honest, I did a lot of research on you, but I did not probably do my due diligence on the center of land economics. And I was curious about like, what do they do? What are you excited to work about there? And also like a general question of why constitute this new organization and not work through, say, other existing Georgist organizations in the United States? Like, is there some niche that it fills that they don't?
Yeah, so the answers to both questions is, first of all, we've only been around a couple of months. And the main niche we're filling is just doing the direct political dirt under your fingernails work. You know what I mean? And then also just like, after I left Value Base, I just wanted to get more directly involved in like kind of the political side of things. And it's a very lean organization right now. I mean, right now it's just me and Greg Miller, right? So it's like, if we wanted to do stuff, it's just better than doing it individually, right? Because, once we get our 501(c)(3) status, we can take tax exempt donations and stuff. And so we needed a sheet of paper just to like do some work, right?
Mhm.
Second, people take you more seriously when you're the center of something, and you put it on your letterhead.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's very important, but like we are a serious organization.
Mhm.
This is how a lot of think tanks get started. And the answer is we are working with some of the, quote unquote legacy Georgist organizations. So we're friends with, let's see, Progress and Poverty Institute, which is formerly Robert Schalkenbach Foundation.
Mhm.
We're friends with the Henry George School of Social Sciences, friends with Common Ground, friends with the Center for the Study of Economics, formerly known as the Center for Property Tax Reform, which is run by Josh Vincent.
Mhm.
So we're constantly in talks with them because those are the large orgs that have a lot of funding and a lot of expertise and stuff. And so we're
Yeah,
constantly talking to them.
I get that.
And
I'm in the same
and
position.
and so we're looking to work with them. We don't have anything to announce just at the moment, but
Mhm.
we're hopeful that like a lot of the things they're trying to do, we can be like, yeah, we'll be happy to do that analysis for you and co-brand and do the work together. And then if we
Mhm.
can borrow one of your analysts to like help with the white paper, we'll do the modeling work and just like put out a
So,
joint press statement.
excuse me for interrupting, and I don't mean to be rude, but it is a think tank specifically.
Yes,
Okay,
I
okay.
mean, sure, yeah, I mean, whatever think tanks are,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, but we're a nonprofit specifically, right? And
Okay.
that's the big difference from value based, right? Because value based was a for profit,
Right.
like traditional startup kind of thing.
Okay, that's fair. I know that you've been talking about wanting to do some kind of think tanky thing for a really long time now. Man,
Yeah,
I'm very glad that you're able to do that. I wish you the absolute best of luck in that. Because
yeah,
honestly, your brain is the brain for it. No offense. Not I mean I know I'm kind of calling you neurodivergent, but I mean like in a good way. You know, like
yeah. No, I don't take that as an insult. Just like it's true, right?
yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, no, I think it's a good place. I've also just like really wanted to do more research and open source too.
Mm.
So we've got our open source library, Open AVM Kit, that is kind of in soft launch right now. You can find it on GitHub, and we just want to put out more materials. The reason you don't know much about us is that we haven't done much yet because we only existed for a couple months. You know what I mean? But we're working on a big project in Baltimore right now, and what we're trying to do is model a property tax shift
Mhm.
in Baltimore. There's a lot of excitement about potential LVT reform in Baltimore, Maryland,
Mhm.
and in other places in the region. And my philosophy has always been you can't even advocate for Georgism until you've done the math, because people have all these hypothetical objections,
Right,
right?
yeah.
You're going to eradicate farmers. You're going to kick grandma out of her home. Like you're going to raise taxes on middle class people.
Right.
And like when you do the modeling, you have concrete answers to all of those questions,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like because people can imagine anything because you said the word tax
Mhm.
and it's going to go up. I know it somehow,
Right, yeah.
but when you can show people on a per parcel level the effect of a revenue neutral shift, you can be like, we're not raising any more money. We're just changing where it comes from. And you can see that this is going to mostly shift the tax burden to underutilized properties in the most valuable areas. People don't know that downtown areas are worth orders of magnitude,
Mhm.
like 10, sometimes even 100 times more than the surrounding areas,
Mhm.
right? Like just the number of zeros on downtown property values will just boggle your mind, even if they're vacant,
Oh,
you
yeah, it's
know?
crazy.
And so when you show people that, like their jaws just drop,
Mhm.
right? You know, although in places like San Francisco, which are really pathological, to the point where like the majority of the value of a property is like land, in most places in America, once you get out from the city center,
Mhm.
yeah, land is a big portion of your value, but it's not most of it.
Right, yeah.
And so if land is not most of your value, if like your home is, if land is 30% of your home value and you shift the tax base, to the land and off the buildings, then most of that, like anyone whose property is not mostly land is going to benefit. And
Right,
anyone
yeah.
whose
Which
property
is
is
most
most,
people. Like
which is
most
most
yeah, yeah.
people.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then the people who get hit by it are mostly downtown people who are not utilizing their properties well. Right.
Yeah.
Who are the people who should get hit by it.
Right.
And
Mhm.
then even if you can't get those reforms through, just like figuring out all the just everyday boring problems, like assume just like LVT, universal billing exemption, it's all off the table. Just fixing the assessments and making them fair, there's always a constituency for that, right?
Mhm.
Because there's all these like long-term complaints about property taxes, right? The assessors, like, they want better tools to help them do it more frequently, because everything goes better if you can do it every year, but not everybody does it every year. And when
Right.
you don't do it every year, you get sticker shock. And then, we can do it faster, we can do it better, make their jobs easier.
Mhm.
We can make it more equal, because a lot of property tax protests are not actually based off of, I think this value is inaccurate. It's more on, I think this value is inequitable, which is, I noticed that you gave Bob, who lives next door, a different value than me. So why are we
Right.
valued differently when our properties are the same in the same location? That's not fair,
Mhm.
right? And so uniformity is even more important than some abstract notion of accuracy. The idea that you're treating everyone the same according to the same rule and not arbitrarily singling anyone out. There's always a constituency for that.
Mhm.
And all these other just issues that are tied up with it. So anyway, we're working on this big project with Baltimore. We're modeling the whole city,
That's really
on a
exciting.
per parcel level. Um, we're doing it with an open source library, so
Mhm.
all of our work is going to be completely reproducible. So if you can get through the pain of installing Python dependencies, you will be able to, like, run through line by line and do everything we do from source data, which is all public information data,
Mhm.
right? You'll be able to do the same enrichments, the same transformations, create the same reports we're able to create, and understand and like see the whole audit trail of how this comes together. And we're hoping that we can use this as a template for everything we do, right? There'll be a nice big CLE letterhead report with the findings, with a
Mhm.
nice, like, executive summary that just boils it down to like 3 bullet points,
Mhm.
and then there's going to be all the nerdy details for the nerds,
Right.
right? And that, and then, so it's going to have policy recommendations. It's like, this is what we found when we modeled Baltimore. Now this enables us to, so there's deliverable right there. Like, here's just for the assessment office. Here's for the city council. Here's just
Right.
our findings, right? And then additionally, here's some recommendations for how you could, improve some things in terms of data collection, in terms of assessment practice. Now on the policy side, now that we have this data, now we can do modeling. We can
Mhm.
run counterfactuals. What if we did this kind of policy for our taxes? What if we exempted all the buildings? What would that look like? This current bill, let's run the numbers and give you the exact per parcel values of the taxes before and after the change. What if we got rid of this exemption? What if we added this one? you know
Right.
we would have answers to all of those questions, and we will.
And those are really helpful because I mean, so I feel like we occupy two different parts of the space because like you do the think tank stuff and I do like the I don't know I guess like the youth outreach Twitch
Sure.
streaming stuff, right? And but that work very directly helps this. You have no idea how many times I've cited is land a big deal and the numbers within it on this stream because just being able to say I have like an estimation of how much this will raise, or you know what I mean, or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
really helps dispel a lot of people's anxieties about Georgism. And there's obviously a lot of anxiety because it's new and, a lot of people
Why
aren't
shouldn't there
familiar with it.
be?
Right.
Yeah, but like we already have like some crazy preliminary findings that we're
Oh, of
finding.
course, but you know how people are. It's not like it's not necessarily a rational anxiety. It's just I don't know about this thing, and I already kind of like the thing I'm already invested in. So like,
Right.
yeah,
But yeah, no, but we're finding all kinds of stuff in
Mhm.
Baltimore that, like, we think can really help. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Just data collection practices.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of this is because there's so many possible things you could measure about real estate
Mhm.
that it seems overwhelming. But there's only a couple of fields that wind up being predictive and being relevant, right? And if you just have the square footage, the age, the condition, the quality of every building, and I don't really need to know, if it's got vinyl siding. You know
Right.
what I
Yeah.
mean?
There's
I,
only
I
a
don't I don't need.
few variables that really do anything to the price.
Right.
Mhm.
Now, if you've got a city the size of Baltimore and you've got limited resources, that's tough.
Mhm.
In the future, we want to do things like be able to process street photography in bulk,
Ooh, that's really
because then you can
interesting.
do auto classification.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it's like a lot of, like, you got to send people out in cars, drive, make a judgment, write it down. It takes
Mhm.
forever, right? But like a bunch of findings we're finding is, there's a lot of condemned properties that haven't had that characteristic noted. There's a lot of properties that, one thing we found was our models were getting thrown, and then we realized that all these parcels where our predictions were just totally off were not houses. They were like off street garage parcels, like 200 square
Ooh.
feet of land,
Yeah.
you know? and it was just like a little storage. It was like a personal storage unit, right? There's
Right.
tons of these all over Baltimore, and it's like, okay, yeah, sure, you treat that like it's a house, and that's a missed prediction, and it looks like you've got this massively regressive property tax.
Mm.
Because like you missed it by 100x because it's worth like, I don't know, like a couple $1,000s, and you valued it as if it was a house.
Right, yeah. Because it's just a little
Right.
box.
It's just a little box, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there is like lingering regressivity we have to deal with, but first we got to like tag all the garages correctly.
Mhm.
And once you do that, it's like, okay, well, let's put the garages in a box by themselves and model them separately.
Mhm.
And then we can have like an accurate assessment of what we're actually dealing with here. Right? Like, how bad is the property tax regressivity problem really? Like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but like what is it really, and not just an artifact of overvaluing a
Mhm.
garage by 100 times.
Right, yeah. I think all that work is very, very interesting. If you'll allow me, I'd like to steer back into some more political questions. Not that I don't find it interesting, it's just that, like, it's a little out of my expertise, so naturally it's more like, I'm just like, ooh, exciting, and then you just kind of keep going.
Yeah. Let's talk politics. Like, let's talk what we can actually do about this.
Yeah, because I'm a poli-sci guy principally, so that's a little bit more easy. That's a little easier for me. Let me look at my questions really quickly. I apologize. I just want to see what I'm looking at. Somebody asked a question earlier about sortition, and this has been a thing that's been kind of growing among Georgists recently as a point of interest. And it's obviously not a part of Georgism itself, but a lot of Georgists just really like the concept of the reform. Are you familiar with the idea?
This is where like you basically like appoint a person by lottery to do stuff.
I would probably say more like you randomly select maybe a legislative body of some kind rather than maybe a single officer. So then it's
like a jury of representatives
exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of Georgists are interested in it because well, first I think they're very frustrated with the low level of information that American voters have. And they would want to be able to talk to a jury and educate them on an issue and actually have them vote on something with some level of knowledge. And also I think Georgists historically have always had some level of direct democratic bent to them. Yeah, like that has always kind of been a popular idea within Georgism. I know that's kind of fallen away a little bit because, referendums didn't. Prop 13 didn't exactly turn out so good, but yeah, I was just kind of curious what you thought because somebody was asking in chat earlier, and I wanted to make sure I touched on it before I forgot.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems fine to me. I'm kind of agnostic on those kind of things.
Oh,
You know
really?
what I mean, it's a little bit outside of my, it's all of them. There's this kind of like aspect of like, what's the ideal form of government, and then it's like, what's the best I can actually get now. And so I'm very just kind of pragmatically focused on, okay, I'm stuck with this system. Here's maybe this ideal system on paper, but how do I get to the big idea I want in the smallest number of steps from what I've got?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so
I
like
do.
so it's like, I mean, yeah, sure, maybe you could like make some sortition reforms at the local level. I mean, that could be cool, and I can see the abstract benefits of it. I just, seems like a tough sell at any kind of large scale in America.
No, that's fair. I think sortition, much like Georgism, kind of suffers from status quo interpretations of what it means to be fair, if that makes any sense. Like, to give an example, Georgism kind of suffers because a lot of people determine economic fairness on the basis of I make a certain amount of income and you make a higher amount of income, so we should just be taxed in proportion to our incomes, and things should be progressive in that specific way. Well, I think Georgists are much more interested in fairness on the basis of use. We don't really play with ability to pay. We tend to play with what did you cost other people, essentially, and you should pay your dues no matter how much income you might be bringing in. Now, of course, there might be adjustments to that. Citizens' dividend has always been very popular, but yeah, I think like sortition suffers from like a similar anagogic problem where people are very, very used to elections and feeling like they are very directly involved, even if like numerically speaking, being one out of like 200 million electors is not that many people. You're not really going to change stuff. But people still like that feeling of just being able to put a ballot in.
I'll try something. I'll try something on for size, which is really weird.
Go for it. Mm-hmm.
I recently discovered this book. I think it's called The Science and Practice of Land Valuation, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And it is how the Georgists actually valued land, which is completely different from how we do it now, even completely different from how I do it, right? It's completely different from modern appraisal. They would basically go out and just get a bunch of citizens, and they would get them all in a town hall meeting. And then you would have an experienced assessor running the meeting. He'd put up a big map of the city. And he's like, what's the most valuable street in the city? And everyone would be like, Main Street. He's like, north or south side of Main Street. And they're like, well, the north face of Main Street. That's where all the bars are and whatever, you know? And he's like, okay, all right, we're going to call that X. Puts an X on the north side of Main Street. And then he's like, what's the second most valuable? And from what stretch? And they're like, oh, from 4th to 7th Street on north face of Main Street is the most valuable stretch. It's like, and it's uniform across that. And everyone's like, yeah. He's like, okay. Everyone knows that who's looking. He's like, okay, great, X. Second most valuable stretch. And they're like, okay, well, it's the stretch of Main Street north face from 1st to 4th. Okay. How relate these two in terms of percent? And they're like, Jimmy from the Chamber of Commerce says 90%.
Right.
And then Susie, who goes, you know, Susie Collins, who goes shopping there, is like, it's more like 95%, you know? And then they argue, and then they come to a consensus as a jury. And he's like, okay, let's call it 96%. Going once, going twice. Don't worry, we'll publish it in the paper. People can put in comments. We'll be back again in a week.
Right. Yeah.
Can I pencil in 96% for today? Right. Yes. Right. It's 96%. And he just does this over the whole city, just on every side of every city block.
Oh, that's gonna take forever.
Well, they did this back in the day. I mean, they probably took them all year, but they got it done in a year, right? You know what I mean? They had no computers, but you know, they allege in this book, in small towns they value the whole city in a year. They would not value parcels; they would value streets. And then they had this mechanical system for translating street values into parcel values based on the size, shape, depth, all this stuff, all based on allegedly empirical observation. But it all comes down to getting a group of citizens together and agreeing by consensus on the relative value of every street and just extracting that local knowledge.
That's really funny.
If you were to, it's called the summer system. And if you were to tell me today that you were proposing to do this, I would think you were insane. Like, it's also like very like completely against like YIMBY received wisdom. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, no, I do.
like you bring like an ancient Georgist back and you're like an ardent YIMBY and you're like, okay, so tell me, what's the solution to the land problem? He's like, community input.
Right,
you know what I mean?
That's exactly what Georgists do not want, because that every single time that happens, we end up with just a bunch of homeowners colluding.
Right. But allegedly this worked, and he also claims, you know, you got to keep in mind this book is marketing material, but at the same time, they claim this was implemented in 70 cities. Cities like Philadelphia, New York, Cleveland.
Ooh, those are big cities. I've heard of
big
those.
Cities. They're smaller now. They're smaller then than they are now.
Right.
But like,
yeah, but still pretty damn big, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are bigger than, you know, I mean, some of these had like 1 million people in them or 500,000 or whatever, you know, that's still big. And they would anchor these like relative values to sales that were observed. They had any like question you could come up with. Well, what if it's triangular? Well, what if it's a corner lot? What if it abuts two things? What if it has alley access? Like there's like a chapter like dealing with that, how they dealt with it. They did this for 20, 30 years. And so it's just, but it's so crazy that the like main ingredient is like public input.
And it's funny. Oh, sorry.
And it's so crazy because it's like my instinct would be that how could this possibly track market values? Allegedly it does. It would be interesting to reproduce it today. But the most important part of it is by definition, the community is happy with it.
Right, that's true. Yeah, because they're the ones who made it.
Its greatest accomplishment is it's like maybe it trades off against accuracy to some degree, but by definition, it was created by community consensus. And it's revised. It goes through like rounds of like feedback until it's like finalized. Speak now or forever hold your peace. So it's like,
how can you complain? Right?
It's like it basically like you get someone charismatic in, you get everyone in, and like you have this like you've been doing this for like 20 years, so you know how to work a crowd, and you just like own the room and like get everyone on board, and like you channel and judo everyone's like criticism. It's like, well, that property is not worth it. Okay, well, what would you say it's worth?
Right.
And and it's like, now remember, Mr. Simmons, if you lower your property value, we're trying to value the street and make sure that if your property is valued less than everyone else arbitrarily, that means everyone else is paying more taxes, and that's not fair. We want to make sure everyone is at the same level.
Right.
Mr. Simmons is in the same room as all the people on the other side of the block from him.
Right. And so, of course, Mr. Simmons, yeah. I actually find that charming. I can kind of, in a rough way, see how it could almost approximate market value. Not very well, but especially because I think the deliberation might make it less effective. I know that wisdom of the crowds tends to work less when you deliberate, and that if you just ask everybody individually but don't let them deliberate, it tends to result in a more accurate answer. Though that would probably lead to a less feeling of consensus and consent.
Right.
But I could see how that could work, just because land is, obviously created by, like, subjective value like everything else. And so it, like, yeah, I could kind of like roughly estimate it. I kind of find that charming. I don't know why. It's like a cute story.
Like the Georgists of the time were just like very just like more democracy was always better.
Yeah.
They were very ardent about that. Like direct election of senators in many ways was downstream of energy they were pushing for. Referendums, all these things, like they were very against indirect democracy. And some historical analysis is that wound up biting them in the butt when the populist vote went for something else. But maybe they're right about some things that we don't give them enough credit for. Who knows?
Right.
Like the answer to a lot of these questions is you have to reproduce them and see if they work.
Right. Somebody in chat was saying something about that. It kind of plays back to what we were saying about at the beginning about how people are more and more invested in things that are more and more remote instead of direct. And so the people who are actually invested in the immediate things are usually, as per Yimby wisdom, kind of the worst people who you don't necessarily want to be able to have this kind of community input.
Well, the problem with community input is because it's such an afterthought and because it's been crafted in the least democratic way possible. Right? You're not actually assembling everyone who's allegedly represented by this like let's have a city council meeting and like hear from the people. But the people who show up are very non-representative.
Right.
There's very few of them, and then the meeting itself is scheduled on a time that's very inconvenient for anyone who's young
with a
or
life.
Has a job or has children or you know what I mean? Like 90% of the people who live in the city, right?
Right.
So it's mostly
and that's why a lot of people were so into sortition, is because it's like, well, now we have an actual representative sample, and maybe then the YIMBY is the YIMBY objection wouldn't be so bad. But I think one possible caveat to that is obviously, like in George's day, there just weren't as many homeowners, simply, and that really does kind of change dynamics a lot.
Yeah, and that was the whole. I mean, that's Jefferson's whole idea, right? Is like, and then it's also like the British Tory thing. Is it's like, post-war is like the more people you can make into tiny little aristocrats, the more you can create like a permanent coalition for the landed lobby and things like that. And I mean, I'm a homeowner, and but I think also, I think we overestimate like just how easy it is to reach homeowners,
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that.
Because like I said, the majority of the average homeowner's house is not land value. Like a good chunk of it is, but like most of it's, it's like 30% land allocation is quite a bit out in the suburbs. And, plenty of people have between 15 and 30% land allocation. And so, you show them you've got a reform, it's going to save them some money. Why wouldn't they vote for it?
Right. And if you have the numbers to actually show them that, it really helps a lot. I mean, of course, you still have the problem with low information voting, which is the thing I talk about a lot. But at the very least, once you have the numbers, it does give you some foothold.
Yeah. Stick a mailer in their mailbox. It's like, do you want to save $100?
Right. Easy. Right. Yeah. Congratulations.
$236.43 for parcel number XYR37B.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I love that idea. I've always loved that idea as like a Georgist messaging campaign. I was gonna say propaganda. I'm trying not to be a mouse on stream. I've always loved that idea. But yeah, okay. I did have another question if you would like to move on.
Sure.
Yes.
Go for it.
So another question I had is, now that the Georgism movement is resurging, we have a lot of people who are interested. There are people like you, me, um, uh, other people who are now like really making this a huge part of their lives and organizing for it. Uh, are there risks of the movement growing in the wrong direction? And
I mean,
what do you think those wrong directions could possibly be from this vantage point?
That's a risk that every movement has,
Of course,
right?
but yeah.
So I mean, there's a
Second part
million
of the
different
question then.
yeah. So the first is, you know, you can get co-opted. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like you get co-opted and sidelined.
Mhm.
You could have a charismatic leader turn out to be a bad guy. I promise that I will not do bad things, but I can't speak for other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
I
you
am
get
a bad guy.
SPF. You could get SPF'd like the effective altruists did, and now you've like got that hanging over your head forever. That like really we're not crazy, but this like one guy like went crazy, and like we probably like should have kicked
Yeah.
him out earlier. You know what I mean?
And you're tainted now, like basically forever.
But like I don't know. I think like you can get over things like that. Like just bad people exist, and you have to trust people, and you can't always catch them beforehand. And people make mistakes, and you know. But like another example is just I think one thing we can do is that we can I would be sad if the movement just became an exclusively online movement, and it
Oh
just
yeah, same.
became and it never turned into actual it became more of an identity and a thing to yell about, like if it became like kind of more like the online leftist movement, which I think
Mhm.
just
And there is a real risk of that.
I
Yeah.
think even if you're an online leftist, you have to admit like the movement has just utterly failed, right?
Oh yeah.
Like yeah, like you got played like a fiddle by the powers that be on the center left and the right, and it all became about identity. They started eating their own, and they've achieved no policy goals, mostly because they weren't able to. They were so anti-authoritarian. They weren't and hierarchy and like
Right.
anyone being in charge. They weren't able to really define
No
goals.
capacity for coordination, basically.
Yeah, they were
Mhm.
so anti-institutional. I
Mhm.
mean, so one thing is I think we could fail to build institutions, or we could build institutions that just do nothing,
Right,
right?
that's fair.
You know what I mean? We're such a small movement at the time. It's like those are kind of like a little far off things to worry about. I think the main thing we should do is, um, I think we should focus on getting some, like finding a beachhead, right? Like I'll use a metaphor. I have narcolepsy
Mhm.
and cataplexy, which is a condition that causes me to fall asleep while I'm awake. I just like lose all body control, but I'm still conscious. And I found this little trick to like wake myself back up when I
Mm.
can't move anything in my body. Is I found this on Reddit. You just like project all your consciousness just into the tip of your finger and just try to move it. And
Ooh.
then you like start moving your hand. Now you can move your wrist, your elbow, and like your whole body unlocks. I
Mm.
think that should be what a small political movement should think about. You want to
I
find
agree with
that tip of
that.
the finger. You find the easiest win somewhere.
Mhm.
Like everything's so intractable, right? But somewhere, some county, some city, some European duchy, somewhere, some South Asian
Yeah, just get
enclave.
a win and make
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and what does that win look like? You have
Mm.
somewhere where there is willing people who are
Mm.
willing to listen, where the rules from on above are not too already opposed, like you don't have like constitutional blocks and stuff, and you have someone there, a local, who's a local advocate, and you figure out what stands between you and marginal local victory, not complete local victory, but the next marginal local victory,
Right.
right? Enumerate the things that stand between you, and it's like, oh well, we can't we don't know what the land is worth. Okay, well, call in the CLE and we'll assess it for you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Oh, it's like, oh, we don't have the legal expertise. Well, we need to build an institution of Georgist legal experts. You know what I mean? To like figure out what's necessary. It's like, oh, we don't have enough charismatic speakers. We don't have someone who speaks this language. Whatever. Like, figure
Right.
out whatever
Yeah.
it is, connect the dots, get your little local win, and then document the crap out of it. Crow about it all day long,
I
right? Like the
totally
Yimbies
agree.
are crow.
Yeah.
This is what Austin is for the Yimbies, right?
Yes.
Austin is the tip of the finger of the narcoleptic finger for the Yimbies, and And it's just like a couple of years ago, everyone was like, if you build a lot of, luxury housing, it's going to raise rents. And now it's like one of the few places in the country where rents are going down. And they just push that pie into every NIMBY's face.
Right, every single
time it
time.
comes
Yeah.
up. And it never gets old. They just like lemon cream pie all day.
And I totally agree. I actually find it kind of funny because I guess I expected to have more divergence in strategy, because like I was really expecting this interview not to be combative, but to be like, because we're sort of different personalities and we occupy different spaces, and you're saying so many things that I'm just like, yes, like let's just like burrow our way into these little.
But the other thing is that you also want to like increase your serendipity layer, right? So one of the things the CLE is doing.
That's $1 million.
So the thing is, it's like here's a mistake: is me being too online and too like rabbit holey and being like, I am the self-appointed leader of Georgism and I need to micromanage and control everything and I need to do everything myself and I need to not talk to everyone. I just need to work, right? What I need to do is basically be out there. It's like, hey, everybody, I'm only one guy. I can't do this all myself. A lot of you guys are interested. A lot of you gals are interested. Here are some things that need to be done, right? These are valuable, important things. Like everyone who has got too many things to do needs to write down all the things they don't have time to do and find the people in the movement who have time to do them. And it's like, hey, people in the movement, get some skills. I'm a washed up video game developer and here I am like a mass appraisal expert. Took me 2 years, like you just burrow into a field in the age of AI, you can learn quick, right? Like what is it you need? Like maybe you can't become like a full lawyer, but you can like learn what you need to learn about jurisprudence and bills. You know what I mean? You can learn what you need to learn about local land use regulations. Like you can learn it. And so like what we're doing at the CLE, we're collaborating actually with Progress and Poverty Institute about like a list of open research questions. Like some of y'all have PhDs, some of y'all are grad students, some of y'all are citizen scientists. I need someone to study like a couple of like material questions about the homestead exemption, right? I have this hypothesis that universal building exemption would be better than the homestead exemption. But I don't know. I would like someone to write a report on that. I would like someone to tell me exactly what the cost of adjudicating a homestead exemption is. I gave you that whole spiel before. That's all based on my observation and anecdotes. But what is the cost really? Like, and actually, who really benefits from it? Who's not benefiting from it? How many people are eligible for one but don't receive it because of stupid? And how many people are not eligible for it but are claiming it and getting away with it? Right? Can someone quantify that? That is going to be just like amazing ammunition in the reform conversation. Here's a good example. 12 states in the union are real estate non-disclosure states. It's really hard to do assessments when there's no sales. And real estate non-disclosure, which means like when you sell your house, the assessor doesn't know how much it cost. Like they don't get that transaction.
That's crazy to me. I didn't even know that. That just sounds so weird.
Make brick without straw.
Yeah, that's like saying, hey, we're going to collect income taxes, but no W-2s. Like, you can keep your income completely private, and we're just going to guess, and it's like, how do you do that?
Someone will assess your income.
Yeah. From, like, I don't know, like, looking at you.
What kind of ties you wear,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's
I didn't
insane.
know that. That's fucking crazy. Sorry.
And this is pitched to people because it's like, inaccurate assessment. It's like people are like, first of all, people think it makes their information private. It doesn't. When you sell your house, your realtor, the other realtor, you, the seller, the home insurance company, the lender,
tons of parties already know. Yeah.
Federal government probably like 7 people like already know what you sold your house for. And guess what? They sell that on the third party market.
Right.
So it ain't about privacy. Second, because it's private, that information is now valuable and gets resold. So in some cases, these local governments buy local government information back from themselves through these third parties. So it raises the cost of assessments, right?
Yeah.
And then additionally, people are like, okay, well, I want the assessments to be inaccurate because then they won't rise. Well, what happened? Do you think that the information about people's houses is going to be uniformly obscured, or are some prices going to be more obscure than others?
Right.
There's a lot more middle class homes than there are really expensive ones. A lot of people just volunteer this information when the assessor asks them, and they probably get a better response rate from just regular people than from people with $10, $100 million houses. right? And
Because
then
they're the statistical anomalies. They're the ones that are the hardest to estimate.
Right, and there's fewer of them, and you know those people make way more sure to like make sure the information doesn't get out there. And so what happens when they beg, borrow, and steal the information they need to get, and they like figure out what like average priced homes probably cost, but they have no idea whether that's a $10 million home or a $100 million home.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think you middle class homeowner, your taxes will go up and down based off of that information environment?
Right. Yeah.
I have a very strong hypothesis that they will go up. I can't prove it. I would love someone to dig into the research.
That's
and tell me.
a really interesting hypothesis. That is, see, this is why I like
I'm pre-registering now. Like it probably hurts the middle class homeowner in terms of net property tax burden.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because what people don't understand is that it's like, well, if my value doesn't rise, my taxes can't rise.
Right.
The problem is that the millage rate is set based off of the target budget.
Right.
So the thing is, I want to raise $1 billion in tax revenue for my huge city, right? And my tax base is $100 billion in appraised value, right? I'm going to set the tax rate at 1%. What if I want to raise $2 billion? Tax rate is 2%.
Right. Yeah.
You see, so they just set the tax rate to whatever it is to get the money they need. So let's say the appraised value goes from 100 billion to 200 billion, but I only want to raise $1 billion. What happens? The tax rate falls by half. Like if all properties uniformly increase in value, but the revenue stays the same, nobody pays any more taxes because that tax rate floats relative to the budget, not to the valuations. It's a little like wonky and confusing. What this means, your taxes only go up if your house goes up more than a comparable house or somebody else's house, right? Do you see what I mean?
I do.
Like it's squeezing a sausage, right? Just imagine you're squeezing a sausage. It's like, lower these valuations. Well, then these people pay more taxes. Lower these valuations. Well, these people pay more taxes, right? Because the government's always going to get the same amount of revenue and they will set it based off of that target. So they will increase the rate if the tax base decreases in value. And people don't understand this. And this is actually a massive permission structure in local government to kind of like make property taxes like function. It's kind of sneaky and weird. The local official will crow all day about how they haven't raised the millage rate in 10 years. And that mean old property tax assessor, he raised your values. So go send your death threats to him. But that property tax assessor is required by the state constitution to value at market value and has no power over to the tax rate. The elected official has power over the tax rate. What does the elected official know will happen if property values rise, but they keep the tax rate the same? They are raising taxes. They know they're raising taxes. But by focusing your attention on the people who are raising the values, they are denying their responsibility for setting the tax rate.
Right. That's very interesting. And
and they like it that way.
I mean, if I was in that position and acting rationally, that is a rational choice to make.
The elected official gets to raise your taxes while directing all the blame at the civil servant who will get fired if he doesn't appraise at market value.
Yeah, it's literally like stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar and blaming your little brother. Like it's like it's all win for you basically. So he's
like, oh, what can I do? I certainly can't lower the millage rate. You know,
right? Yeah.
Well, we'll just write your representative about upping the homestead exemption by $5,000. You know,
right? Yeah.
The other thing is just like, okay, so here's another thing CLE does. How can we like improve politics? So one thing you can just do is that if you put out policy papers that are very digestible and easily shareable, right? PDFs with like some formatting and like good letterhead, because hard copies get circulated. That's a fun tip. You can change the vocabulary of local government because a lot of like elected officials, like they have limited vocabularies, right? So in Texas, in property tax reform, something must be done about rising property taxes, but nobody knows what. And the only vocabulary they have is like the blue state, you know, people are like, well, maybe taxes are good actually, but yeah, they're kind of high and we need to do something about it. The Republicans are like, we can abolish them. And then other people are like, we can cap the valuations or we can increase the homestead exemption. Like those are the only three, like, or it's like, or we can take the permanent fund and use some of that money to subsidize, like just give people money to like lower their property taxes, right? Those are the only like vocabulary words they know. Like give people money from state funds, or cap the appraisals so don't let the values rise,
Right.
or just
There's a
exempt
lack of
homesteads
like
more.
breadth of vision, basically. Yeah, and you
Yeah,
can
but
add
they
to that.
don't know.
Mhm.
You can add to that. You can add universal building exemption. Hey, it's a better exemption than the homestead exemption,
Mhm.
right? And so, like, by giving them a new vocabulary, then that filters down. Like, so much actual policy work is done by like 20-year-old analysts. You know, like, we've got this weird gerontocracy in politics, right? Everyone thinks it's like all 70 and 80-year-old vampires, but their staffs are all like 20-year-olds, like running around.
Right, yeah.
You know
And
what I
they're
mean? And
influencing
those
them.
people are,
Yeah.
and they're very online.
Yeah.
And it's their job to like do the senator's homework for them, right?
Mhm.
So if you do the staffer's homework for them and you give them these policy things, they're like, yeah, you know what? I was wondering if we should do this universal building exemption that everyone's talking about. You know, it might be like a better way to do property tax reform and deliver more relief than the homestead exemption. And then it's easier to adjudicate because it doesn't depend on the status of the homeowner, and the middle class homeowner actually sees more relief. You know what I mean? It's like we haven't even said the word Georgism or LVT, and they're
Right,
already
yeah.
like kind of sold on this as like a way forward,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
You know, so by giving new vocabulary, and speaking of that complex systems podcast I mentioned before, beautiful new vocabulary word I just learned listening to it.
Mm.
Blue tape.
Blue
Have you heard
tape?
it?
No, I haven't.
Blue tape.
Educate
Do
me.
you
Enlighten
already
me.
do you already know what it is though?
No, or I might, but I don't know what it's referring to. Like, I don't.
Well, it's let me just give you a hint.
Okay.
It's downstream of abundance.
Oh fuck! I just read that book twice.
No, it's not. I'm not sure.
Oh, it's not in the book. Okay, okay.
It's not in the book, but it's just related idea. It's related to YIMBYism and abundance.
Oh man. Oh, this hint is like just specific enough to be like to give me some direction.
Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. Okay.
Yeah, please.
It's red tape for Democrats.
Oh, God damn it. That
Right.
I was never gonna get that, though.
Right. Like, it's red tape, but it's
Yeah.
blue tape because it's in blue cities, right? Because blue cities can't build and blue states can't build, right? And it's like, oh no, we got to get rid of our blue tape. And it's like, it's blue. It's our fault. It's like, if you're a Democrat, it's like, oh, it's our fault. You know, we just like, we stopped building. Oh no, that's my identity now. Like, how can we build it? Like, and all of a sudden, you have this psychological transformation where before this was not even on the radar, and you crystallize this notion that it's like, we got to get rid of the blue tape.
Yeah,
Right?
I totally agree. I love those little terminology things.
It's like, I'm ashamed of my blue tape.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I do those little things all the time. Like even within the Georgist movement itself. Like I really like using the term royalism a lot. I know that it wasn't Dan Sullivan, but who used it to say royal libertarians? Was it Dan Sullivan?
I have no idea.
Somebody knows in the chat, and they're gonna be like, "Shen, you idiot! You should know this." But anyway, he used it like that, and I've expanded its use. It was Dan Sullivan. Okay, I've expanded its usage so much, and it's just like, it really plants the seeds in people's minds of reframing the problem with the current status quo as being like feudal vestiges of an outdated land system that we can resolve. Like, rather than say, hey, look, the problem is all the rich people, like the word capitalism does. Now that one's obviously tricky because capitalism is a very sticky word, but at least within the Georgia sphere, like, it kind of works, you know. And I like using it a lot, or at least using it as like an adjective to say like royal X. That's always useful. But yeah, I totally agree with increasing people's vocabulary. It's kind of funny how, as Georgists, a lot of our work is just resolving ignorance. I think there's a Henry George quote, but I don't remember exactly what it says. But he essentially says that the masses of people are ultimately enslaved by their own ignorance, first and foremost, and that essentially all systems exist, like, even implicitly by the consent of the people, and that
I think that.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for political action. That it's like, you know, I was never really bought into Sapir-Whorf on the level of like a human, but I think for like political institutions, it makes perfect sense. Like, political institutions are just so limited by the tools that are on their desk.
Yeah.
And they will use whatever's on their desk. And like, I mean, you look at like the pre-Trump Republican Party, they were just like, tax cuts, Laffer curve, tax cuts, Laffer curve.
Right, it's like,
you know,
three things. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Democrats, you know, have fallen into like the kind of same thing lately in their kind of moribund phase where they're like green jobs, you know, and like and
they're ideologically
like,
captured, and they have like no Vision.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, and everyone's always fighting the last battle. You know what I mean? And so I think like just making people aware of like how to like reframe these things. Anyway, now I'm just kind of like retreading old ground. I do got to go soon.
That's totally fair. How
Want to
soon?
wrap it up with
Yeah.
like one or two last questions?
Sure. Yeah. How soon? Give me a time just so I can know which
I
ones.
don't know, 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes. Okay, we'll do one. I did have one last, more just for fun question. So
Sure.
I believe you've written about applying George's ideas to digital spaces,
Oh yeah.
and one conversation I very often have with my fellow Georgists is about monopoly and rent seeking in the technology space.
Yeah.
And you're obviously a lot more familiar with this space than I am. And I was just kind of curious if you knew about any policy suggestions to try and prevent, say, consolidation of market power within the technology space. Because obviously things like LVT, they will somewhat impact it, but
Right.
like they're not going to be very direct when it comes to Facebook. Also, I'm sorry,
Well,
Ian.
I think, if you want to talk about like direct analogs to land-like assets in the digital world, the most obvious examples are probably IP addresses and domain names,
Hmm.
you know, and both of those have massive, like, I don't know what all the rules are for allocating like IP version 6 domain names and, or IP version 4 domain names, right? Because those are the ones that are scarce.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to transition to IP version 6 like 10 years ago, and I don't know
Yeah,
if we
it's
ever
still
did.
very slowly happening.
Yeah, so that'll solve our problem one day. But until
Hmm.
then, like, but domain names, it's like, yeah, like every human readable domain name less than like 80 characters has already been taken, right? And Vitalik Buterin actually wrote like a really good piece. He guest posted it on progressandpoverty.substack.com about, because there's like a domain name system baked into the Ethereum layer, right? Like the
Hmm.
Ethereum name system or whatever. And he talked about like, can we use the lessons of LVT and apply it to some kind of demand based fee for holding a popular domain name, because there's this problem where they get squatted and like sold for millions of dollars. And so, I mean, it's like we can make more domain names. So it's like, yeah, I can't get Lars Doucet. Maybe I can get LarsDoucet.fart,
Right.
and we'll just
Yeah.
get along with that,
Hmm.
but it is like an example. It's more important with things like radio spectrum, right?
Hmm.
Or orbital real estate or things like that. But you're talking about tech specifically.
Yeah,
So
like say social media, we can kind of box it into that just to keep it, because that's
yeah.
the one I'm really the most curious about because it's very powerful in our society right now
Okay.
and
So
very consolidated.
probably the best example of this is just people buying chart position. This was alleged a lot with like the Apple iStore with like just like, you can kind of just like get this self-reinforcing loop where you have recommender charts and people basically through like people can set up like basically get on the chart early and get a lot of success, plow that back all into on-platform advertising that keeps them on the chart, and then you just have a frozen top 10 chart that just like never moves for like years, right?
Mhm.
That is not really aiding in discovery, and those people are basically like just collecting rent, right? And they're using, and then they're putting part of that rent back into creating a moat around their castle,
Right.
right? That's like the most obvious example. There are clear mitigations you can do to do that, but if you're the platform owner and you like the situation, then there's not much an outside actor can do besides like, like government intervention. Um, and like Tim Sweeney's been fighting that fight against like Apple and Google for like so long, right? Is just the platform tax they take on the app stores. There's also a case for intellectual property.
Hmm.
So one of the things is if you go back to LVT or you go back to severance taxes on resources, you have people like Brian Kaplan argue in his Search Theoretic Critique of Georgism that speculation is good actually, and that the best response to the Kaplanian argument that speculation is good actually is should complete 100% monopoly rent flows forever be the only reward sufficient to incentivize discovery,
Hmm.
right? Like you may be able to say that discovery happens through speculation and therefore speculation is good actually, but you still need to make the case why 100% control of first come, first serve monopoly rents forever is the only possible and just incentive for it.
Yeah.
And this applies to many systems. Patents last for 20 years. Why? Is 20 years the optimal amount of time? Is it the optimal amount of time for all categories? Probably not. Like, I think patents are the least worst form of intellectual property. You know what I mean? Like, they
that's
clearly
interesting.
work. Yeah, no,
Because usually people say that about copyright or trademarks.
No, I would say copyright is one of the worst forms of intellectual property.
Oh, that's interesting. That's like the inversion of the Henry George position.
No, well, like the problem with copyright is that it lasts 100 years.
Oh,
in Henry George's time, it did not last 100 years.
Okay.
Copyright effectively lasts forever. Nothing invented in your lifetime will ever go out of copyright.
Okay, I get you now. For a second, I was like, yeah, I get it.
It's all about the term length. It's all
Yeah.
about the term length.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like patents that last forever would be horrendous. You know, and everyone knows this, and that's why they don't last longer than 20 years. I would argue that we should probably have different time lengths on patents for different domains. I think there should be no software patents at all, because
Really?
I think software patents are mostly used by trolls, and it's gotten even to the point where like big tech companies will pool their patents and get them defensively to protect each other from patent trolls who do nothing, because people will just patent calculating the square root of 2 on a computer and then just like sue everyone in the world. Like this happens all the time. And so there's this kind of consensus even among big tech that like, you know, well, they all want their own software patents, but like for just the sake of survival, like rivals will pool their patents to kill trolls, which are just law firms that own a bunch of patents. They didn't even invent them. They just bought the patent portfolio, and all they do is sue.
Right, yeah.
That's all they do. They're just pure trollish rent seekers.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, so it's like kind of like almost a mutually assured destruction situation.
So I think that the term on software patents should be 0. Maybe the term on medicines or other things, like you could say, should be 20. And then like, who knows what it should be for other things? Or maybe it should be shorter on medicines, or maybe it should be shorter on certain kinds of medicines. Like, I just don't think 20-year perpetual monopoly on a thing you invent.
We just kind of said it without any empirical evidence.
That's the right number,
right? Yeah.
And then with copyright, it's like 100 years is the wrong number. It should be shorter. I want copyright to exist at all. I don't think it should last for 100 years. I think 14 years with an option to renew it, which is what this country was founded with, is very reasonable, because then a lot of works that are created during your lifetime that you're inspired by will enter the public domain, and something that's like really important, you have an opportunity to renew. Right. I think you could create and then it's very clear what's in the public domain and not. After 28 years, you just know for sure it's in the public domain. I think you could create a very good compromise system that tracks the market, even with like dumb systems like every year to register your intellectual property, you got to re-register every year. So you got to care enough to file a form. And if you do, the first year it costs $1. Next year it costs $2. Next year it costs $4. And you stop when it's not worth it anymore.
Right, yeah.
You know, because eventually it becomes $1 billion, right?
Yeah, that's very similar to some ideas that some Georges pass around, but I don't want to get into them right now. But
You know,
some people's ears are perking up right now.
And there's like some optimal thing, and like because it's like it's important. I agree that in some cases, granting temporary monopoly rights, you know, because like if you look at the world before patents, it was a disaster. Everything was a trade secret. Nobody told anyone anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, sure, you know, but I think we really need to question the idea that monopoly is the proper incentive to dole out for the things that we want to incentivize, right? And if we grant that monopoly is the right incentive, we need to ask ourselves how much monopoly, right? And then we need to check that it is, you know, like, because it's so easy to just hand out these perpetual monopolies. And I just think like, you know, we should just be that's the thing that infuriates me so much about the Kaplanian argument, is that he's like, discovery is important, speculation is good, therefore 100% perpetual monopoly forever.
Right. And it's like, what?
I'm like, okay. Is 99.9% land rents acceptable to influence discovery?
Right.
And then if you say yes, well, then we know what kind of a person you are. We're just negotiating now.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if you say no, we know that you're just like fundamentally stonewalling us and you just want this.
Right. Surely there's a number between 0 and 100%.
Right, yeah.
That we can agree on.
Yeah, and the Georges position is always the maximalist position. Whatever we can get away with that doesn't absolutely break the economy, let's do it, you know?
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, you need to make the case that only 100% monopoly rents will incentivize things. That's clearly ridiculous.
Right.
Some number lower than that is acceptable.
Right, exactly.
Right. Some number, and probably empirically provable, but no one wants to have that conversation.
No.
You know?
But anyway, I think that was it. I do have one last question. It's very quick, if you don't mind asking. Land Value Tax Max wanted to know about when your next episode of your aunt's sci-fi story will drop.
Yeah, no. Every time someone asks that question, the date gets closer because I get sidetracked.
It's like psychically willed.
No. Well, it's like I didn't know anyone cared about that, and then like people are like, I want to hear.
He
more
asked
about
me it twice.
Like people keep asking me. Okay, if people keep asking me, I'll have to give the people what they want. I just have limited time, so I want to spend it on the most important things. If the people want talking ants, then I will be forced to give them talking ants at some point. So the more you ask, the more likely I am to do it.
All right.
I plan to get another one out probably in the next couple months. We'll see. I've got like 8 of them in like unfinished drafts that are like really terrible. So it's all about just like, sitting down and overcoming the cringe.
Yeah, I'm writing a script right now on abundance, and I'm like, I have so many drafts. But anyway, thank you very, very much for being on, Lars. You were a very lovely guest. I think we had a great time together. We had really good energy. If you ever want to come on again, you're always free to come on. I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of DMs on questions to ask you next time around if you do ever want to come on again. And yeah, I don't know. Have a good life, I guess. Like, don't get sick.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cool. I appreciate it.